There is a drug in your neighbor's kitchen right now that was built to kill. Not to heal, to kill. Fast. It was designed in a laboratory to hunt down the most aggressive cells in a dying child's body and stop them before they finished the job. And yet, this morning, somewhere on your street, a woman in her 50s opened a small bottle, swallowed one pill, and went back to making coffee. No hospital, no fear. Just relief in her hands and her skin for the first time in years. Same molecule, same chemistry, one built to end a life, the other to give one back. How does a poison become a promise? How does the exact thing meant to destroy the body become the thing that finally lets someone live inside it again? The answer is not in the drug. It never was. It is in a single number that almost nobody talks about. And once you see it, you will never look at medicine the same way again. Let me tell you about the number because everything in this story turns on it. But first, you need to understand what medicine looked like when this drug was born. And I need you to forget everything you know about modern hospitals. No chemotherapy wards, no survival statistics printed on hopeful pamphlets. In the 1940s, if a child in America was diagnosed with acute leukemia, the doctor did not talk about treatment. He talked about time, weeks usually, sometimes days. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia was, at that time, a sentence with no appeal. The white blood cells, the very soldiers meant to protect the body, turned traitor. They multiplied without limit, flooding the bloodstream and the bone marrow, crowding out everything the body needed to survive. A child would come in tired, then bruised, then bleeding. And then they were gone. There was a man in Boston who could not accept that. His name was Sidney Farber, and he was a pathologist. Now, that word matters more than it sounds. A pathologist is a doctor who works with the dead. He studied tissue under a microscope. He examined what the disease had done after it had already won. Farber spent his days looking at the aftermath of a war he never got to fight. And he grew tired of it. Tired of understanding death perfectly and being able to do nothing about it. So he made a decision that most of his colleagues thought was foolish, maybe even arrogant. He decided to move from the basement where the dead were studied to the bedside where the living still had a chance. He wanted to treat children, and he had an idea that, on paper, sounded almost backwards. Farber had noticed something in his research. Folic acid, a nutrient we now find in every prenatal vitamin, seemed to feed these leukemia cells. It made them grow faster. Think about that for a moment. The building block meant to help cells divide and thrive was the very thing pouring gasoline on the fire. Most people seeing that would simply say, keep folic acid away from these children. But Farber asked a stranger question. A darker one. What if we could build a molecule that looked exactly like folic acid, close enough to fool the cell into grabbing it, but was actually a fake? A decoy. A key that fits the lock but jams it instead of opening it. If the cancer cells were starving for folate to keep dividing, what if you handed them a counterfeit version that stopped the machinery cold? This is the idea that changed everything. Not a poison in the crude sense. A trick. A molecular imposter. He turned to a chemist named Yelapragada Subbarao, a brilliant and largely uncredited scientist working at Lederle Laboratories. And together they created a compound called aminopterin, the direct ancestor of the drug we are talking about today. In 1948, Farber published his results in the New England Journal of Medicine. 16 children with acute leukemia treated with this folate antagonist. And for the first time in the history of the disease, something happened that had never happened before. The children got better, not cured. Farber was careful, almost painfully honest about that word. The remissions were temporary. The disease came back. But for a few weeks, sometimes a few months, the impossible had occurred. The bleeding stopped. The color returned to their faces. Children who had been dying stood up and walked. Farber had proven something the entire medical establishment had refused to believe. Cancer, this force of nature that killed without mercy, could be pushed back by a chemical. It could be fought. It could be interrupted. And here is where our story truly begins. Because the drug that came next, a refined and slightly less toxic cousin of amenopterin, would carry this fight forward for decades. Its name was methotrexate. But nobody at that bedside in Boston watching those children breathe easier could have imagined where this molecule would eventually end up. Not in a cancer ward, not fighting leukemia at all. They could not have imagined the woman in her 50s, in her kitchen, swallowing a pill so she could hold a coffee cup without pain. To understand how the same drug crossed that impossible distance, we have to look closer at what methotrexate actually does inside the body. And that is where the number finally reveals itself. To understand the number, you have to understand what methotrexate does when it enters a cell. And I am going to explain this the way I wish someone had explained it to me, without the wall of jargon. Every cell in your body, when it wants to divide, has to copy itself. It has to build a second set of DNA, the instruction manual for life. And to build that manual, the cell needs a specific tool. That tool is made from folate. Not the folate itself, but an active, energized version of it that the cell produces using an enzyme with a long name, dihydrofolate reductase. Just remember it as the folate factory. Methotrexate walks into the cell and shuts down that factory. It clamps onto the enzyme and refuses to let go. No active folate gets made, and without it the cell cannot copy its DNA. It cannot divide. The assembly line stops. Now, here is the elegant, brutal logic of using this against cancer. Cancer cells divide faster than almost anything else in the body. They are greedy. They are constantly copying, constantly building. So when you shut down the folate factory, the cells that suffer first and worst are the ones dividing the fastest. The cancer. This is why methotrexate worked against leukemia. And through the 1950s, it did something even amenopterin had not. In 1956, a researcher at the National Cancer Institute named Min-Chiu Lee used methotrexate to treat a rare cancer called choriocarcinoma. And this time, the remission was not temporary. He cured it. Completely. With chemotherapy alone. It was the first time in human history that a solid cancer had been cured by a drug. Not surgery, not radiation. A molecule. Lai was actually pushed out of his position for continuing to give the drug even after tumors seemed to disappear because he insisted on treating until a blood marker returned to zero. He was right. He was decades ahead of his time. The principle he discovered, treating to a biological endpoint rather than a visible one, became a foundation of modern oncology. So by the end of the 1950s, methotrexate had a clear identity. It was a cancer drug, a powerful one. Given at high doses, it flooded the body and hit those fast-dividing cancer cells hard. That was the job. But medicine has a habit of noticing things it was not looking for, because there were other cells in the body that divide quickly. Not cancer cells. Ordinary cells caught in the crossfire. The lining of your gut. The cells in your bone marrow. Your hair follicles. This is why chemotherapy causes nausea and hair loss and a weakened immune system. Those are not random side effects. They are the predictable result of a drug that targets fast division, hitting the fast-dividing healthy cells too. And one particular kind of cell caught someone's attention. The skin. Your skin is one of the most rapidly renewing organs in your entire body. It constantly sheds and rebuilds itself. And in a disease called psoriasis, that renewal goes haywire. The skin cells multiply far too fast, piling up before the old ones can flake away, creating those thick red scaling plaques that itch and crack and bleed. For the people who have it, psoriasis is not just cosmetic. It is relentless. It can cover the body, invade the joints, and wear a person down year after year. And in the 1950s, doctors noticed something. Cancer patients who happen to also have psoriasis, when treated with these folate antagonists for their tumors, watched their skin clear up. Read that again. They were treating cancer. The psoriasis cleared as a side effect. The drug that stopped fast-dividing cancer cells was also stopping the fast-dividing skin cells of psoriasis. The same mechanism, the same folate factory, shut down. But now it was calming a disease that had nothing to do with cancer at all. In 1958, two physicians named Edmondson and Guy published on this exact observation, and this was the first crack in the door, the first sign that this cancer drug had a second life waiting for it in a completely different corner of medicine. By 1971, the FDA formally approved methotrexate for severe psoriasis, a cancer drug officially crossing the border into dermatology. But even then, the story was not complete, because doctors were still thinking about methotrexate the same way. They thought it cleared psoriasis by killing off the overactive skin cells, just like it killed cancer cells. Same weapon, different target. They were wrong. And the thing they were missing would turn out to be the most important part of the entire story. The part that explains the number. The part that explains the woman in the kitchen. Because methotrexate was not just killing cells. It was doing something far stranger and far more useful. When methotrexate is used to treat cancer, the doses are enormous. We are talking grams. Sometimes the body is flooded with so much of it that doctors have to give a rescue drug afterward, a form of folate, just to save the healthy cells before the whole system collapses. It is a controlled poisoning. You push the body to the edge, hit the cancer, and then pull it back. But when methotrexate is used for psoriasis or for arthritis, the dose is not measured in grams. It is measured in milligrams, once a week. A dose so small that compared to the cancer regimen, it is almost a rounding error, often less than 1% of what an oncology patient might receive. Same drug, same molecule, same chemistry. But the amount is so different that it is barely the same medicine at all. And for years, everyone assumed the low dose simply did a gentler version of the same thing. A little bit of cell killing, just enough to slow down the overactive skin without wrecking the rest of the body. It seemed logical. It seemed obvious. It was also wrong. Because if methotrexate worked in these low doses purely by killing dividing cells, the math would not add up. The amount is too small. It should not be enough to meaningfully calm a disease as aggressive as rheumatoid arthritis. And yet it does. Powerfully, reliably, for millions of people. So something else had to be happening. Something the folate factory story could not fully explain. The answer took decades to uncover, and it came largely through the work of a researcher named Bruce Kronstein, whose investigations reshaped how we understand this drug entirely. And what he and others found was almost poetic in its irony. At low doses, methotrexate barely acts as a cell killer at all. Instead, it triggers the body to release a molecule called adenosine. Now stay with me because this is the heart of everything. Adenosine is one of the body's own natural peacekeepers. When tissue is stressed or damaged, adenosine floods the area and sends a signal. And that signal, in plain terms, says, stand down. It tells the immune system to calm itself, to stop attacking, to lower the alarm. Think of your immune system like a fire department. Its entire job is to rush toward threats, to respond to danger with overwhelming force. That is a beautiful thing when there is a real fire. But in autoimmune disease, the fire department has lost its mind. It is smashing down doors in houses that were never burning. In rheumatoid arthritis, it attacks the joints. In psoriasis, it attacks the skin. The body's own defense force turns on the body itself. And what low-dose methotrexate does through adenosine is walk into that chaos and quietly tell the firefighters to lower their hoses, not by killing them, not by poisoning them, by flooding the scene with the body's own natural signal for peace. Do you feel the difference now? At high doses, methotrexate is a weapon. It destroys. At low doses, it is a diplomat. It negotiates a ceasefire. The very same molecule. The number changed everything. This is one of the most profound truths in all of pharmacology, and most people go their entire lives never knowing it. The dose does not just change how strong a drug is. The dose can change what the drug fundamentally is, what it means, what it does, who it is for. At one dose, methotrexate belongs to a child fighting for their life against leukemia. At another, it belongs to a grandmother who just wants to open a jar without her hands screaming at her. And here is what moves me most about this. Nobody sat down and designed a low-dose immune-calming drug. Nobody set out to invent it. It was discovered the way most of the greatest things in medicine are discovered, by accident, by observation, by a few careful doctors noticing that cancer patients' skin was clearing and having the humility to ask why. The drug did not change. Our understanding did. The molecule was always capable of both. We just had to be paying attention. In 1988, the FDA approved methotrexate for rheumatoid arthritis, and over the following years it became something remarkable. It became the anchor, the foundation, the single most widely used disease-modifying drug for one of the most painful chronic conditions on Earth. A cancer drug, sitting at the center of autoimmune medicine. But to really understand what that meant for the people living inside these diseases, we have to talk about what rheumatoid arthritis actually does to a human life. Because the number on the syringe is only half the story, the other half is written in the bodies of the people it saved. If you have never watched someone live with rheumatoid arthritis, it is easy to misunderstand the word. Arthritis. Most people hear it and think of stiff knees. A little ache when the weather turns, something you rub with a cream and complain about at dinner. That is not this. Rheumatoid arthritis is not wear and tear. It is not the price of getting older. It is your immune system, the same system that fights off infection, deciding that the lining of your own joints is an enemy. And it attacks, every day. It inflames the joint from the inside, swelling it, heating it, and slowly, over years, eating away at the cartilage and the bone until the joint itself deforms. The hands are often where it shows first and where it is cruelest. The fingers begin to drift, pulling sideways at the knuckles. Grip weakens. And I want you to sit with what that actually means because we take our hands for granted until they betray us. It means you cannot open a medication bottle. It means buttons on a shirt become a 20-minute battle you sometimes lose. It means you stop cooking the meals you love because you cannot hold the knife. You stop writing letters, you stop picking up your grandchildren, not because you do not want to, but because you are afraid your hands will fail halfway and you will drop them. For most of human history, there was almost nothing to offer these people. Aspirin later, gold injections, strange and toxic, steroids which worked but slowly poisoned the body in their own way, thinning the bones, raising the blood sugar, aging a person from the inside out. Doctors watch patients deform in real time and could only manage the pain, not the disease. That is the world methotrexate walked into. And when it arrived in those small weekly doses, something changed that older physicians describe almost in disbelief. People who had been sliding toward disability stopped sliding. The swelling in the joints went down. The morning stiffness, that hour or two every day when the body feels welded shut, began to ease. The disease did not just get managed, it got interrupted. There is a phrase doctors use for drugs like this. Disease-modifying. It sounds clinical, bloodless. But think about what it means. Most drugs treat the symptom. They quiet the pain while the disease keeps marching forward underneath. A disease-modifying drug reaches down and slows the march itself. It changes the trajectory of a person's entire future. A woman diagnosed at 50 who, without treatment, might have been in a wheelchair or unable to dress herself by 65, instead keeps her hands, keeps her independence, keeps cooking Sunday dinner for a family that never fully understood how close she came to losing all of it. That is what a number on a syringe can do. And here is something I find quietly beautiful and a little humbling. The people taking methotrexate for their arthritis, for the most part, have no idea about the leukemia. They do not know that the pill in their hand descends from a molecule built in the 1940s to fight a childhood cancer. They do not know about Sidney Farber or the 16 children in Boston or Min-Chiu Lee being pushed out of his job for curing a cancer too thoroughly. They just know that they can hold their coffee again. And maybe that is how it should be. Maybe the highest form of medicine is the kind that becomes invisible, the kind that fades so completely into an ordinary life that the person living it forgets there was ever a war. The drug does its work in silence, and the reward is a morning that feels unremarkable, boring even. A cup of coffee, a buttoned shirt, a held hand. We spend so much time in medicine talking about breakthroughs, about miracles, about the dramatic moment of discovery. But the real miracle is often the opposite. It is the absence of drama. It is the disease that was supposed to be there and simply is not. Still, methotrexate is not gentle. It does not forgive carelessness. And the same power that makes it so effective is the reason it demands respect, and why the story of this drug is also a story about the fine line every powerful medicine walks. The line between healing and harm. Because for everything methotrexate gives, it also asks something in return. Every drug worth having comes with a bargain. And the more powerful the drug, the more honest that bargain has to be. Methotrexate does not hide what it is. Remember, at its core, it still interferes with folate, still touches the machinery of dividing cells. Even at these small weekly doses, it is working on real biology, and the body notices. So the people who take it are not simply handed a pill and sent on their way. They are watched. Blood tests regularly. Checks on the liver. Checks on the blood counts. This is a partnership, not a prescription. And there is one detail about methotrexate that has caused real tragedy, precisely because it seems so small. The dosing. For arthritis and psoriasis, methotrexate is taken once a week, not once a day. Once a week. And that single distinction, weekly instead of daily, is one of the most dangerous confusions in all of medicine, because if a patient, or sometimes even a pharmacist or a nurse, mistakes it for a daily drug, the accumulated dose climbs into dangerous territory fast. The very thing that makes it safe at low weekly amounts becomes toxic when taken daily. People have died from this error, not from the disease. From the calendar, I tell you this not to frighten anyone, but because it captures something essential about this entire story. With methotrexate, the number is everything. Get the number right, and it is one of the most valuable drugs in the modern pharmacy. Get the number wrong, and the same molecule turns on you. The dose is not a detail. The dose is the whole identity of the drug. There is a phrase in pharmacology, centuries old, from a physician named Paracelsus. The dose makes the poison. It means there is no such thing as a substance that is purely safe or purely dangerous. Water can kill you in the wrong amount, and a poison can heal in the right one. Methotrexate is perhaps the most vivid proof of that principle that medicine has ever produced. Think about the full arc of it, the same molecule, unchanged since the 1940s. In grams, it is chemotherapy pushing a child's body to the brink to kill a cancer. In milligrams, it is a gentle diplomat coaxing an inflamed immune system back toward peace. The molecule has no intentions. It is not good or evil. It simply does what it does, and everything depends on the hand that measures it. There is a lesson in that which stretches far beyond this one drug. So much of what harms us and so much of what heals us is not a different thing. It is the same thing in a different amount. The same sun that warms the skin burns it. The same fire that cooks the meal destroys the house. The same intensity that builds a life can consume it. Medicine simply makes this truth undeniable and puts it in a bottle. Now, methotrexate also asks patients to change how they live in small ways. Alcohol has to be limited because both alcohol and the drug pass through the liver, and the liver can only take so much. Folate, that same nutrient the drug is designed to block, is often given back in careful amounts on the other days of the week. It sounds contradictory giving folate to someone taking a folate blocker, but it is elegant. The small folate supplement soothes the side effects in the healthy tissues without undoing the drug's calming effect on the immune system. It is a balance tuned over decades of careful observation. And that word, balance, might be the truest word in this whole story. Methotrexate is not a sledgehammer or a magic wand. It is a scale. On one side, the disease. On the other, the risks. And the physician's job, the patient's job, is to keep that scale level week after week, year after year. For millions, that balance holds. And they live full lives on the strength of a drug that most of them will never fully understand. But methotrexate's journey did not stop at arthritis and psoriasis. Because once doctors truly grasped what it was doing, that it was not just killing cells but calming the immune system itself, a new question opened up. A bigger one. If this drug could quiet the immune system's attack on the joints and the skin, where else in the body was the immune system attacking? What other diseases, other forms of suffering that no one had connected, might answer to the same quiet signal for peace? The answer turned out to be far larger than anyone expected. Once you understand that a disease is the immune system attacking its own body, you start seeing that pattern everywhere. And that is exactly what happened with methotrexate. Doctors had a drug that could quietly tell an overactive immune system to stand down. So they began carefully to ask where else that message might be needed. The list grew, and it kept growing. There is a disease called Crohn's, where the immune system attacks the digestive tract, turning the simple act of eating into a source of pain and damage. Methotrexate found a role there. There is lupus, a condition so strange and cruel that it can attack almost any organ at once: the skin, the kidneys, the joints, the lining of the heart. Methotrexate became one of the tools used to hold it back. There is a whole family of inflammatory conditions, from certain forms of vasculitis, where the blood vessels themselves become inflamed, to dermatomyositis, which attacks the muscles and the skin together. Again and again, the same drug appeared doing the same fundamental thing, turning down the alarm. And there is one use that I find especially moving because of what it represents. When doctors began performing organ transplants, they ran into a wall that had nothing to do with surgery. The surgery worked, the problem was afterward. The recipient's immune system, doing exactly what it was built to do, recognized the new organ as foreign and attacked it. A perfectly transplanted kidney would be destroyed not by any flaw in the operation, but by the body's own defenses rejecting the gift that was meant to save it. To make transplantation possible at all, doctors needed to calm that immune response. And drugs in the same broad family, immune calming agents, became part of the foundation that made modern transplant medicine possible. The idea that you could persuade the immune system to accept something rather than destroy it was revolutionary. And it grew from the same root understanding that methotrexate helped establish: that the immune system is not always the hero. Sometimes it is the thing that must be gently restrained. Step back and look at the shape of this whole story now. A drug is born to kill cancer cells in a dying child. Along the way, someone notices it clears the skin of psoriasis. Then someone realizes it is not just killing cells, it is calming the immune system. And from that single realization, the drug quietly spreads outward into arthritis, into lupus, into the gut, into the very frontier of transplant surgery. One molecule reaching further and further into human suffering, not because it changed, but because our understanding of it deepened. This is how medicine actually advances, not usually in a single blinding flash of genius, but in this slow widening of a circle. Someone notices something they were not looking for. Someone else asks why. And that question opens a door, and behind that door is another door, and the circle grows wider, decade by decade, until a drug built for one desperate purpose has quietly touched dozens of lives it was never meant to touch. And here is the part that stays with me. Every one of those expansions began with a patient, not a theory, not a laboratory hunch. A real person lying in a real bed whose body did something unexpected that a careful doctor noticed. The psoriasis that cleared, the joint that calmed. Every widening of that circle was, at its origin, a human being whose suffering or whose unexpected relief taught medicine something it did not know. We like to imagine that science drives medicine forward from the top down, from the brilliant mind to the grateful patient, but so often it is the reverse. The patient teaches the doctor. The body reveals a secret the textbooks never held. And the wise physician is simply the one humble enough to notice and honest enough to ask why. Methotrexate is, in a sense, a monument to that humility. A drug whose entire second life Its life-saving career in autoimmune disease exists only because people were paying attention to things they were not looking for. But there is one more turn in this story. Because after all these decades, after all this understanding, there is still something about methotrexate that we do not fully explain. A mystery hiding inside one of the most used drugs on Earth. And it points toward a truth about medicine that is easy to forget. Here is something that might surprise you. Methotrexate has been used in medicine for over 70 years. It has been given to millions upon millions of people. It sits on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines, the drugs considered most important to every functioning health system on Earth. And yet we still cannot fully explain exactly how it works in autoimmune disease. We have pieces. Good pieces. The adenosine story, the immune calming, the folate machinery, but the complete picture, the precise sequence of how this molecule quiets a disease like rheumatoid arthritis, remains partly hidden. Researchers still publish papers debating the finer mechanisms. Decades in, one of the most important drugs we have still holds a secret. Sit with how strange that is. We can put this drug in a person's body and reliably change the course of a disease that would otherwise cripple them. We have done it millions of times, and we still cannot draw the full map of how it happens. I find something oddly comforting in that, because we live in an age that promises us total understanding. We are told that everything can be measured, modeled, predicted, controlled. That given enough data, there is no mystery that will not surrender. And then you look at a simple yellow pill, taken once a week by a grandmother with sore hands, and you realize we do not even fully understand that. The most familiar things can still be the most mysterious. Medicine is not a finished cathedral. It is a construction site that never closes. We are building it while standing on it. And every drug in your cabinet, no matter how ordinary it looks, carries within it a history of accidents, of guesses, of things noticed and things still unexplained. The certainty we feel when a doctor hands us a prescription is, in truth, built on a foundation that is still partly under construction. And I think there is a kind of freedom in accepting that. Because if the experts, with all their instruments, still hold open questions about a 70-year-old drug, then maybe we can all be a little gentler with ourselves about the questions we cannot answer in our own lives. Maybe not knowing is not a failure. Maybe it is just the honest condition of being alive in a world far larger than our understanding of it. Methotrexate teaches that too, if you let it. This drug does not demand that we understand it completely. It only asks that we respect it, measure it carefully, and pay attention. And in return, it does its quiet work. It calms the fire. It gives back the hands, the mornings, the small ordinary joys that a disease had stolen. There is a humility built into this whole story that I think our modern world desperately needs. The humility of Sidney Farber, honest enough to say his remissions were only temporary, even as he was making history. The humility of Min-Chiu Lee, willing to lose his job rather than stop treatment too early, trusting the biology over the appearances. The humility of every doctor who noticed a psoriasis patient's skin clearing and, instead of ignoring it, asked the question that opened a new world. That is the thread running through all of it. Not brilliance, exactly. Attention. The willingness to notice what you were not looking for, and the honesty to admit what you do not yet understand. And when you see it that way, methotrexate stops being just a drug. It becomes a kind of teacher, a reminder that the line between poison and cure is thinner than we like to believe. That the same thing that destroys can heal, depending only on the measure. That the greatest advances often come not from those who already know, but from those willing to be surprised. The woman in the kitchen does not know any of this. She just knows her hands work today. And in a way, that is the whole point. The mystery does its work whether or not she understands it. The gift arrives whether or not she knows where it came from. But you know now. You know that the pill in her hand is a descendant of a molecule built to fight a child's cancer. You know that a single number transformed a poison into peace. And once you know that, you cannot look at your own medicine cabinet the same way again. Which raises a question worth sitting with before we close. What else is hiding in plain sight? What other quiet miracles are we swallowing without a second thought? If you are still here with me, all the way at the end of this story, I want to take just a moment to ask you something simple. Subscribe to this channel. Come back and spend time with us. We tell these stories every single day, the hidden histories behind the medicines and discoveries that quietly shape our lives, and I would be honored to have you keep watching alongside us. And I say that for a real reason, not just as a formality, because I suspect that if you have made it this far, you are the kind of person who has lived enough to appreciate what this story is really about. You have probably held a prescription bottle in your hand and wondered, even for a second, where it came from. You have probably watched someone you love get older and seen how much a working pair of hands, a good night's sleep, a morning without pain can mean. You understand that the small, ordinary things are not small at all. This channel is for people like you, so thank you for being here. Now, let me pick the thread back up because there is one last idea I want to leave you with. Look inside your own medicine cabinet tonight. Really look. Most of us see a row of orange bottles and white boxes and we think nothing of them. But nearly every one of them has a story like methotrexate's. A story of accident, of observation, of a purpose that shifted somewhere along the way. The aspirin in that cabinet began as a way to ease pain and fever, and only decades later did doctors discover it could protect the heart, quietly thinning the blood of millions to prevent the clots that cause heart attacks. Nobody designed it for that. It was noticed. A drug called minoxidil was built to lower blood pressure, until doctors saw the patients growing hair where they had lost it, and an entire industry was born from a side effect. A medication for diabetes turned out to reshape how the body handles hunger and changed the conversation about weight for an entire generation. Over and over, the same pattern. A drug set out to do one thing, and the human body, in its endless strangeness, revealed that it could do another. The intended purpose was only ever the beginning. The real story was written afterward in the bodies of the people who took it, by doctors humble enough to notice. We swallow these things without a second thought, a pill with breakfast, a tablet before bed. And inside each one is a hidden history of desperation and discovery, of children in Boston and researchers losing their jobs for being right too early, of skin that cleared when no one expected it to. We hold entire decades of human struggle in the palm of our hand, and we wash it down with a sip of water and move on with our day. There is something almost sacred in that, if you slow down enough to see it. The quiet accumulation of everything humanity has learned distilled into something small enough to swallow. Every one of those pills is a message from the past, from people who suffered and people who paid attention, handed forward to you so that your life might be a little easier than theirs was. And methotrexate, that molecule born to kill, now sending signals of peace through the bodies of millions, might be the most eloquent message of them all. So let us go back to where we started. A woman in her kitchen, somewhere on your street, opening a small bottle and swallowing a single pill before she pours her coffee. She does not know about Sidney Farber, moving from the basement of the dead to the bedside of the living, refusing to accept that nothing could be done. She does not know about the 16 children in Boston who got better for the first time in the history of their disease. She does not know about the counterfeit molecule, the folate factory shut down, the psoriasis that cleared when no one was looking for it. She does not know about adenosine, the body's own signal for peace, or about the number that separates a poison from a promise. She just knows her hands work today. And maybe in the end, that is the most honest measure of what medicine is for. Not the drama of discovery, not the names in the journals, just a person living an ordinary morning that a disease was supposed to take from them and did not. The same molecule that once pushed a dying child's body to its very edge now moves gently through her, whispering to an immune system gone wrong, telling it to lower its weapons. It did not change. The chemistry is identical. Only the measure is different, only the number. The dose makes the poison, and the dose makes the cure. They were never two different things. They were always the same thing, waiting for a careful hand to decide which one it would become. There is a strange grace in that, if you let yourself feel it. That so much of what wounds us and so much of what heals us is not separated by some vast distance, but by a matter of degree. A measure, an amount. The same fire, the same sun, the same molecule, and the whole of the difference resting in how much and in whose hands. She sets down the bottle. She lifts the cup. Her fingers close around it without pain, and she does not even notice, because that is what healing looks like when it truly works. It looks like nothing at all. It looks like an ordinary Tuesday. That is the quiet miracle we swallow without a second thought. If this story moved you or taught you something you did not know, do two things for me. Share it with 5 people who would appreciate it, because these are the kinds of stories that deserve to be passed from hand to hand, the way that knowledge always has been. And subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Then leave me a comment, an honest one. Tell me what you felt watching this. And tell me which hidden history you want me to uncover next. A drug, a discovery, a medicine you have always wondered about. I read them. And the next story we tell together might be the one you ask for. Because there is always another bottle in the cabinet, and every one of them is hiding a story just like this.